I don't particularly care for dandelions. That's my confession for you. I generally try and kill them. I might dig them up. I might use my little dandelion digger and dig them out of the ground. I might just use a little spade or a shovel. I might spray them with a herbicide. I might, in frustration, as I fight a losing battle, angrily pop off the little seed buds and eat them. That was a lie. I've never done that before. As far as I'm aware, I've never eaten a dandelion. I may have eaten them in salad greens before, but never the seeds. The rest of what I said is true. I understand that there's nothing inherently wrong with dandelions, that they are a creation of God's, and that I'm harboring a belief of a culture that often tries to live outside of the balance of nature. I know that they provide pollen for the bees who make my honey, and I know it's also possible to make wine out of them because apparently that's what my great-grandfather used to do. In spite of this, I don't like him. So I was intrigued by the metaphor that Delores Williams used to end her chapter on womanist theology. She borrowed it from Bess Johnson, who was discussing the differences in the play of male and female children in the community where she grew up. She talked about how the boys liked to play tug-of-war, and they would jerk the rope until one group was able to pull the rope away from the other group. They didn't let the girls play, so the girls had to come up with their own game. According to Johnson, we figured out how to make our own little rope out of little dandelions. You just keep adding to them one to another, and you can go on and on. Anybody, even the boys, could join us. The whole purpose of our game was to create this dandelion chain. That was it. And we'd keep going, creating until our mamas called us home. Now, Delores Williams is a professor emeritus from Union Theological Seminary in New York and one of the pioneers of womanist theology. This essay is excerpted from a Black theology collection that's edited by Cohn and Wilmer. She believes that just like the dandelion chain, a womanist theological vision will grow as Black women come together and connect piece with piece. So what is a womanist theological vision? What are some of the important pieces of the chain? These are some of the questions that Williams sets out to answer in her chapter. She draws heavily from Alice Walker as she begins her discussion. She says that womanist comes from a Black folk expression about acting womanish, which was often directed toward younger girls who wanted to know more than was good for them. For Williams, being a womanist is a way of affirming their connection with the African American community while also owning a connection with feminism. A feminism that has been more historically interested in the reality of white women. For Williams, being a womanist has to do with love. Love of self, love of others, male or female, sexual or non-sexual, and also love of food and music and dance. While womanist and feminist are similar, they are also different. A womanist is to feminist as purple is to lavender. This understanding allows womanists to explore the uniqueness of the history of Black women and culture without being limited by the pre-selected issues identified as women's issues by white feminists. Williams identifies 4 elements that help to define the categories of a Christian womanist theological methodology. 1. Multidialogical intent. 2. Liturgical intent. 3. Didactic intent. And 4. A commitment to reason and female imagery and metaphors. Williams believes that having a multidialogical intent will allow Christian womanists to dialogue and act with a wide variety of communities who are concerned with the life of the oppressed. She identifies genocide of people and cultures as important issues. Nuclear weapons is another important issue, and especially important are the struggles of poor Black women, children, and men. She compares the voices of this multidialogical activity to a jazz symphony. It may sound like a racket to those who seek harmony, but it's beautiful music to those who understand what they are listening to. By liturgical intent, Williams expects that the Christian womanist theology will reflect and be relevant to the worship of the church, while leaving the space to challenge the Black church with the prophetic message emerging from the previous dialogues. By didactic intent, Williams believes that a womanist theology should teach Christians new insights about a life of justice. This also means womanists should give authority to the folk wisdom of black women, especially as they answer the question, how ought the Christian to live in the world? And finally, a womanist will emphasize the importance of reason while also maintaining the tradition of female imagery, metaphor, and story. One final point that Williams makes has to do with the Spirit. She reflects on the historical importance of the Spirit in the African American worship. Worship was only seen to take place if the Spirit was high. If the Spirit was present and active in a blend of prayer, sermon, and music that spoke to the pain of the people. Because of this history, Williams believes that the Christian womanist should emphasize the work of the Spirit in the salvation story, emphasizing the role of the Spirit and the poor woman named Mary, mother of Jesus. She also names the Old Testament story of Hagar as an important story where poor oppressed women had a special encounter with God. Now I'm going to state the obvious here. Just name the elephant in the room. I'm neither poor, nor black, nor a woman. I'm a white, middle-class, college-educated male who owns a home in a rural community that is 80% white. I occasionally make relationships with people who speak Spanish, but rarely encounter African American men or women in any of my day-to-day activities. Yet in spite of these caveats, I find it important for me to listen to voices of those who come from different perspectives and social locations, and especially those of different cultures here that I can find if I go into Grand Island, a city not too far away. I appreciate how womanist theology emphasizes the perspectives of the oppressed and also its concern for justice. In my role as pastor of a rural Mennonite church, my congregation and I have recently been trying to relate in healthy ways to a poor family that occasionally comes to church with us. They have a history of moving around, do not often keep their word. They often seem to be making up stories as they go along. This appears to be their past method of operating. It's been a challenge for us to minister to this family of 2 adults and 4 children, and it's obvious how different that our middle-class worldview is from their worldview. So how are we as the church to minister redemptively to them, showing them Christ's love? How many of their problems are systemic? How many of them are the results of choices that they have made? How can we learn from them? What is God trying to teach us? What can God teach us through our relationship with them? It becomes very messy, very quickly. When you try to move on from talking and thinking into being and acting. And womanist theology seems to offer an understanding that action will be complicated, but that's no excuse to avoid it. I also find myself challenged to more clearly think through what I believe about Scripture. As Williams describes a Christian womanist theology, Scripture seems almost to be only one voice among many voices. She advocates dialogue with many social, political, and religious communities, and she also advocates listening to other theological voices, some Christian, some not. She names Black liberation, feminist, Islamic, Asian, Hispanic, African, Jewish, and white Western male traditional as different voices. Scripture is used by Christian womanist theologians to reflect upon those biblical stories in which poor women had encounter with God. Meanwhile, the Mennonite Confession of Faith speaks of Scripture as authoritative for preaching and teaching and discerning. Other claims in our understanding, such as tradition and culture and experience and reason and political powers, they need to be tested and corrected by the light of the Holy Scripture. This apparently is one place of tension between a Christian womanist understanding of Scripture and a Mennonite understanding of Scripture, at least from the current Confession of Faith. From a womanist coming from her experiences of poverty and oppression, Scripture is one of many voices. And experience is identified as one especially important voice. In the Mennonite Confession of Faith, at least in theory, maybe our reality is different. At least in theory, the Scripture is the light that we hold up all other sources to for discernment. Perhaps this is where I return to the metaphor of the chain of dandelions. Even as the dandelions are shaped into a chain, each dandelion stem still retains its own shape and its own character, its own individuality, just as each tradition still retains its distinctives as it dialogues with one another. Yet by listening to other voices, we are shaped into something new, shaped by a power far greater than us, turned into a chain that stretches into the past and on to the future. It can be added on to, on and on and on and on again, a chain that openly invites everyone to join it. And the quote from the story that she tells at the end of her chapter, "And we'd keep going, creating until our mamas called us home." I've enjoyed getting to know each one of you this semester during our class together, at least a little bit, and I wish you the best of luck as you finish your semester, whatever that all entails. And I hope you have a Merry Christmas. God bless.